Hey everyone. Just a quick note before we begin. This month's episode of Coffee and Carbuncles is All Saint Wakes themed. Now, due to the nature of the holiday, we'll include various thunder and lightning noises and jump scares. I realize that some people have phobias and traumas related to these sounds, so if these things bother you, then I'm afraid this isn't the Coffee and Carbuncles episode that you should probably be listening to. Please feel free to check out one of our other episodes. And if anyone needs timestamps or warnings on when these sounds occur, please feel free to DM me on social media. Thank you, and with that said, please enjoy the October episode of Coffee and Carbuncles. Ah, good day, dear friend. It seems we have quite the storm going outside. Come, sit by the fire. You see, I was hoping you would come by today. After all, in fair or foul weather, you've always seemed to be here, haven't you? Oh? Why the concerned look? Could it be the candles strewn about? Or the mysterious book in the middle of them? Have no worries. This cafe is completely safe. You see, a while back I found a book within the depths of the Palace of the Dead. Ever since, I've found I've had a compulsion of sorts to study it. Then, last night I had the most wonderful dream. I was here, of course, but you as well. Together, we put the book in a circle of candles, as you see, and then, well, I heard a laugh, and I'm afraid everything went dark. It was a lovely dream, wouldn't you agree? So, why don't we try it? Let us explore this fun bit of magic together and see what happens, shall we? Now all I have to do is light this final candle and... What? What? No! Wait, why are you summoning a cup of coffee? In fact, why am I at the cafe? Last I recall, I was in the Palace of the Dead. Edda? And my dear friend, when did you get here? Well, I am not quite sure what happened, but clearly we are being joined by Edda today. How strange. Is it the season, I wonder? Hello, Edda? Miss Pureheart? Mrs. Pureheart, I suppose? I'm going to be honest, I'm not completely sure which way to take this intro. Either way, welcome to my cafe. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Please don't hurt us. But really, my flair for the dramatic aside, Edda, welcome to Coffee and Carbuncles. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm just at my usual home, logging on from my usual computer, over in a place I wouldn't exactly want to describe, as I like to keep my privacy in lock and key.
That is a very safe way to go about things, and I respect that. Now, I assume that for this interview, you're not actually draining people's ether IRL.
Preferably not. That does complicate things. I don't exactly need the police visiting my estate so often.
I can imagine that'd cause problems. I myself am actually drinking a nice white chocolate mocha today. It's the weirdest thing. Sometimes I just get strong cravings for white chocolate, and so here I am.
You know, I always do enjoy white chocolate above most of the other chocolates. I wish I had some bigger, deeper reasoning behind it, but I really don't. It just comes down to the way that it tastes and my own preferences.
Well, I mean, people like what they like.
Are you a big fan of your sugary coffees, or do you do normal coffee on most days?
You know, I there's part of me that really wants to be like, oh, I'm healthy and I don't add loads of cream and flavor and sugar to my coffee. But my gosh, that would be a lie. A lot of the times I actually take my coffee with like cinnamon and cream. I really prefer a nice medium roast. There are rare days where I will have a French roast, but in general, a nice medium coffee with some cream is usually where I'm at. Flavor preferences just kind of vary by the day. You have some people that they go to a cafe and they'll constantly order the same thing. Every cafe that I tend to frequent, the baristas are like, when other people order, we know what they're going to order. You come in and we have to make it on the spot because we don't know what you're about to order. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess I'm a little fickle like that.
I think there's a magic to that sort of thing. I mean, I've been known for having regulars, or it would be to the point where baristas would suggest something to me, that because they know what my general tastes are, but being able to come in and always have something new made really does change things up. It always keeps you, I guess stimulated is the right word. I mean, I guess most people drink coffee to stay stimulated, but it never makes anything too mundane or too samey.
In a way, we can almost circle it back to being like Palace of the Dead, where you consider your coffee as, the base, your medium roast, but there's always that little bit of variety, and the variety being, whatever flavor or amount of flavor you put into it, kind of like where Palace of the Dead is always Palace of the Dead, but every floor is a little different. Monsters, chess. It keeps things fresh.
Absolutely. I mean, every time you go into the palace, it's a completely different floor, and some of them are going to be peachy as a Midsummer's Day walk, and some of them are going to be absolutely hellish in comparison. They'll stick out 10 mimics on you. Every other chest is an absolute nightmare. There's a trap right next to everything that's of remote value. And this time we've placed in 4 chimeras.
I will say I've had an instance where it was mimic, bomb, and I was like, all right, I'm done for a while. I am done with Palace. I will come back to this another year.
I had a friend that I ran through it with one time. Just co-op for fun. It was just the 2 of us. And somehow there was a series of, I think it was 20 floors, where every other floor, without fail, he'd fall for the toading spell. So he spent at least a third of that run just jumping around as a little frog. And it was a little humorous, to say the least. It would be horrifying if he was alone.
My hat's off to you, Toad Prince.
I did make that joke at least 10 times.
I mean, you have to.
Just dote him every time that he falls into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, putting 14 aside for a sec, what do you do outside of 14? Because obviously this interview is going to be very 14 focused. So do you have any hobbies you want to discuss before we focus in on the game?
Well, naturally within the game and outside the game, I do roleplay. Occasionally I do creative writing, although it's often geared towards roleplay because I don't always have the time to do creative writing and roleplay. But they naturally go hand in hand. Outside of that, I occasionally play my piano that sits just over here. It's an electric keyboard, not a whole grand piano. Man, that take up a lot of space. I do cosplay. I used to do a fair bit of parkour, actually. And then every now and then I'll do ballroom dancing. I guess ballroom dancing is weird because it's not exactly a hobby, but I do it on an interval that you'd almost consider it like a hobby or like a pastime. The way that some people, when you ask them what their hobby is, they may say, I play this sport.
I mean, I would certainly consider it a hobby. I would actually, I think I'd probably consider it more like a skill set, really, because I've tried ballroom dancing, and I tried it once.
It takes a little while to get a handle, to say.
It certainly does.
But I've been doing cosplay as well. I've only just started making my costumes, but I've done it for a few years now for a yearly convention. I also do a small amount of gardening. It's a little more than just plants around the house. There's a little actual garden just down the way from where I live that I help take care of. So there's a lot that I learned in that process. And then for other hobbies, well, outside of playing video games, I occasionally do a little bit of Photoshop work and a little bit of video editing. Most of it's just to make memes or like little clips for my friends. Sometimes they'll send over clips and I'll edit them and send it back. But with Photoshop, I really just use that as a way to convey my creativity. Because whenever I play Final Fantasy XIV, wrapping it back around to that, I don't use any modifications or any external pieces of software for my client. So sometimes in order to make more creative, more, how do I put it, more complex things happen, I'll utilize Photoshop and assets from the game to make what I want to see.
Oh, that's neat. So what made you decide not to go with any mods then? Because I'm actually a bit surprised. I figured that your in-game experience would be using mods to like completely copy Edda from Deep Dungeon.
Oh, well, that has kind of tempted me over the years. There's been times and there still are times where I consider using a very light amount of mod work. But from the beginning, when I first started getting back into this game, I played it for about 2 months and I stopped for a few years and I came back. I didn't know anything about the modding scene, and that was just around the time of the start of Shadowbringers. So right when modding really started to actually kick off and become something that everyday people would use, outside of like basic glamours or software that was used to assist or almost cheat in raids like Cactbot. But the reason why I ultimately decided to not use mods is because I wanted everything and every action that I do in this game to be seeable by everyone. With mods, it really is nowadays like you have to have a, the mayor code? You have to have a mayor code or a sync shell rolling in order to see everyone else's mods. But that's just a bubble. Anyone outside of it looks completely normal. So while I could do tricks within that, and I've certainly entertained the idea, there's a lot you can accomplish with mods, especially when it comes to giving a good scare. I want everything that I do to be something that everyone else can do and everyone else can see, which is the same thing with my screenshots and all the other pieces of media. I wanted everything that I did to be accomplishable by someone that's, say, not on PC or doesn't have a system powerful enough to run mods or is on a console.
That is so neat. I really like that answer. That is wonderful. I'm really glad that you go about that process that way.
Yeah, and I think the other factor I've come to understand over time as well is that it's sort of the principle where challenge or restriction breeds creativity. By putting these restraints or restrictions on myself for what I can use, rather than just delegating to full mod support where I can freely post my character or practically import and mod on any outfit I want, I have to utilize all the animations the game already has available for me in all of the systems in very intricate ways in order to accomplish an end goal that is desirable.
So, and we'll talk more about all of that later, to be sure. But I'm curious, what actually brought you to the Final Fantasy franchise? Is 14 your first experience with it, or did you play other Final Fantasy games before this one?
Let's see. I think 14 is my first Final Fantasy. Before this, I did play WoW, World of Warcraft, but that was quite a few years before, so it wasn't like I was a WoW refugee escaping from WoW to get to here. It was just that at the time, a few of my friends got super into Final Fantasy 14, and one offered to buy me it's not a trial account, but offered to buy me the first expansion, plus a time card. And at the time, I really enjoyed WoW, and I was watching the gameplay. I was like, this is almost just like WoW. So I gave that a shot, and that was very, very fun because it was interesting to see an experience that was so similar, yet had so many different principles. Like, one of the main issues I had with WoW is WoW has some very, very intricate and very cool lore. Like, cool is just the word I have to describe it. There's some things that you have to take a step back at and really be amazed that there are people that constructed this world with. But then they don't really use that lore all that much. I mean, they have little stage sets when it comes to their raids, but they don't have the main scenario quests that Final Fantasy does. Final Fantasy has a whole JRPG campaign packed in with the experience. And then there's the whole, I don't need to make it multiple characters to be multiple classes. I don't need to buy all my bags from day one. I have the maximum amount of storage. And I don't have to buy my mounts. It was just all very easy to work with and something I was already very familiar with. And then it expands on it because one of the things I liked about WoW is that some of the classes were very freeform in style, but Final Fantasy will exchange that instead for a intricate combo system that demands your attention in order to get everything down, and that was something that really excited me. I'm a very big fan of games that have fun combos that do cool things.
That makes sense.
But to wrap back around, since I'm getting a little off track, yes, 14 is my first Final Fantasy experience. I shortly went on to play Final Fantasy 15 afterwards. I've almost completed that game. And I've played a little bit of the original Final Fantasy 7, but I never got far past the intro. Not that I dislike it, but at the time I was getting into a lot of other games and it fell to the back of the catalog.
Would you mind if I made 2 Final Fantasy suggestions for you?
Go ahead.
I would say check out Final Fantasy IX because the entire game is very much like an opera. It is very dramatic. It is very theater focused. And I think you might enjoy it, especially given that right now Dawn Trail is incorporating a lot from Final Fantasy IX, but also Final Fantasy VI, because Final Fantasy VI tends to be one of the more mature titles of the franchise, and by that I mean it covers a lot of very serious, very dark topics at times, but also the heavy atmosphere that those topics give the game makes for, in my experience, just a fantastic story.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot about 6. That's definitely on the list.
People who regularly listen to this podcast will know that I have such a strong bias towards Final Fantasy VI. I love it. It's my favorite. I will recommend it every time.
Yes, I understand that one was, for many people, that was the point where they, quote-unquote, started taking the series seriously. And it wasn't the fact they weren't taking it seriously before, but it was a very large, very profound message that it had to display in comparison to some of the previous Final Fantasies.
There are times where you'll see in media that, how do I put this? They will purposely include more serious, more dark topics purely for the sake of seeming what we might consider edgy, purely for the sake of doing it. I think a big test for a lot of I almost said social media. That's not right. A big test for a lot of games and a lot of media is, okay, you've included these edgy topics, but how well do you discuss them? How well do you incorporate them into your world? And ultimately, what does the outcome look like while including these topics? And I feel like Final Fantasy VI does a really good job of not only being kind of edgy, having these more serious topics, but also handling them in a mature and respectable manner. And I think that's really where one of the places you really see the game shine.
All right.
So, thus why am I recommending it?
Absolutely. Now, that sounds like a kind of story I want to get into.
Well, given that you clearly like Edda's story from 14, it's one of the reasons that I suggested 9, because 9 tends to be very dramatic compared to other games like, say, 8 before it or 10 after. But also, 6 has that same sort of notion of having this very serious, also almost opera stage-like presentation to it, because Final Fantasy VI is very much a story in 3 parts, which is where you see most theater plays getting a lot of their story arc from. So But getting back to 14, the past few months, I've been trying to focus on music. It hasn't always come through as well as I would like this season. But I was curious, do you have any particular tracks from 14 that you really enjoy? Or music that when it comes on, you're like, yeah, this is probably my favorite theme?
Oh, well, let's see. I have a natural bias to almost every Edda adjacent or Palace adjacent track.
I never would have guessed.
Both because they fit the character, but also because I very much enjoy how they're composed and how they're resembled. There's also the other soundtrack that is the leitmotif, or rather the leitmotif to Blackbossom comes from one that's used for, I believe, Lady Amadine. It was, is it Dark Vows? It might be Dark Vows. No, that was Tantera Deepcroft. I'm thinking The Maiden's Lament. That was a more church organ rendition of, I guess, Blackbossom, although Blackbossom came after it. Alongside that, I am a very big fan of many of the boss themes. I frequently will exercise or jog to them.
Oh, nice.
Because I feel like they empower me, or when I'm going for a jog, I almost view the jog as a challenge. And in that sense, I kind of connect myself with the feeling of the struggle of a boss fight with the struggle of trying to get through a long jog or a long session of exercising. You know, those kinds of songs are meant to empower you. They're meant to test you,
right,
so to speak.
You know, there are some really good studies that have come out that video game music is actually great to listen to while you're either working or you're exercising, because it's purposely designed that your brain doesn't necessarily have to completely focus on it, but at the same time, it still creates a certain atmosphere. Whereas a lot of modern music, like pop music, your brain's trying to focus on the lyrics. You're trying to, really kind of sing along or pay attention to it. Video game music is purposely designed to not do that, and is literally meant to be an accompaniment to other things happening.
Yeah, it's to help with the set dressing. It's not the main act.
Right.
So sometimes it could be background noise, because if it's more repetitive, your brain will get used to it. It's still stimulating, but it won't take your full attention away.
Now, there are exceptions. Obviously, sometimes you will see where there are a few fights in 14 that I'm sure all of us remember the music more than the actual fight, and we're like, oh yeah, that's the fight that had that theme, and not say anything about the boss. But that's a separate conversation.
I've heard a few people are really enamored by a certain beer. It is a very fun song, though. Speaking of those kinds of great songs, I was an incredible fan of most of the music used in the Pandemonium raid series, especially
oh yeah,
Pixvit Leonis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I've never heard it pronounced anything else, but the theme to the Sulfur boss in that series. Because I don't want to exactly spoil names to anyone who hasn't played through it yet. That's definitely is not Dracula.
Pandemonium did a great job of atmosphere. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely. That was... Oh, speaking of, the lobby theme to Pandemonium, at least that's what I like to call it. The jail area. Yeah, the theme to that is incredible. I used to sit in I was doing my relax because I enjoyed that song so much. It'd be perfect while just waiting around for the next one.
My song like that, for me, is actually the Limsa Night theme, A Sailor Never Sleeps. I have spent so much of my time in 14 in Limsa at night, and it's my favorite city. I love it. I love the theme. I love the city itself. It just makes me happy.
That's completely fair. I'm a little similar with Ulda's night theme.
Oh, Sultana Dreaming, right?
Yes, I believe that's its name. But that one always manages to calm me down, feel really at home. There's been a few times where I was just relaxing in my chair, hanging out with a few friends or accomplices or acquaintances, Accomplices is the correct word. And I would feel myself just drifting off to sleep because it was so pleasant. It's like listening to, funnily enough, from the Nier soundtrack, Peaceful Sleep. I've fallen asleep to that song a few times. Not intentionally, but I did.
Did you know that if you go to YouTube, you can actually find an hour-long loop of Sultana Dreaming with very light thunderstorm noises to accompany it, and rain?
That is phenomenal. I'm surprised it's, well, maybe not surprised, but I'm absolutely delighted someone thought of that. Is thunder? I mean, I think there's the rain condition you get in Old Dog. I'm not sure if it has many thunder sound effects. I'll have to double check next time. I'm frequently about there because I'll go to the Crystal servers, and usually their Old Dot areas are populated one way or the other.
The actual YouTube video is called Sultana Dreaming 2.0 Rain and Thunder for 1+ hour. And it's by Jackson Nautilus.
Very well. I shall have to give it a listen to.
I like to play it at work when it's storming outside, and it makes my day very calm. Sometimes almost falling asleep does happen, but it's worth it. It's a trade-off. I accept it.
That's fair, and there are many days for us, whether it's at work or any other thing, that can just be entirely hectic. And you might just need that 5 minutes of a peaceful song, relaxing in your chair, doing just shy of nothing to really reset you.
Oh, 100%. Now, you talked about coming from WoW, and you talked about actually taking a break from 14 and coming back to it. Can you tell me a bit more about that? What was it like starting in 14 for you?
Well, let's see. Like I said, the way that I got into it is I saw that a few buddies were playing it, and one of them offered to buy me the first expansion and a time card. So that is how we rolled off of that. Before that, I had played WoW for a few years, usually with just close friends or on my own. And back then I was a Mistweaver monk, which is the healing spec for monks. So I've always been, in these kinds of games and others, I've always been a healer at heart. So when I came into this game, funnily enough, the first class that I picked to play was Arcanist, because I assumed Arcanist would evolve into the healer I wanted to be. But I later figured out that Arcanist becomes Scholar or Summoner, and I've never really been a pet class kind of character or kind of person. They're cool, but I always like to get in on all the action myself, especially when it comes to healing. I like healing to be something I'm very directly interfacing with as an experience. It should be something that everything that is done should be deliberately executed by me. So the whole working with a fairy or like a pet that kind of sometimes goes off and does its own thing wasn't really what I wanted out of that. So I had to switch over to a conjurer as soon as I hit, was it level 20? There's a level that you have to get to before you can switch to another class for the first time. So basically I had to get to that level as fast as I could, and then run over to Gradania and immediately become a conjurer. But I partied with them for about until that time card ran out. And back then I didn't have as much funding to afford a subscription. So a few years passed. But once I was finally in a much better place, I wanted to pick up the game again because I wanted to play a game that was like WoW, but I don't view WoW very positively these days. And I also have a lot more friends that played Final Fantasy. So I just decided to get back into it. And ever since then, I've been playing on and off with my free company. They tend to have periods of activity. It's not always around every major expansion or every major update, but I play this game often as just a solo person doing my own thing. I mean, it works super well for being Edda. It gives you an excuse to disappear and pop up whenever you want to.
That makes sense. Just like the one in game. Now, tell me about your first time doing Tamtara Deepcroft, and the first time that you actually encounter the big turning point for Edda's story. What was that like for you?
Oh, that was so fun. Okay, so I should state, by the time that I got super into Final Fantasy, the people that introduced me to it, shout out to Captain Jack if you're listening to this, not to be confused with a certain other Captain Jack, but he was the one who led me through a good part of the main scenario, and particularly when Edda was introduced for the first time at about level 15, when you get into Sastasha, he told me to just kind of pay attention to these characters. And so I did, and then later I encountered her in a cutscene. I was like, oh, it's that girl again. Oh, that's unfortunate what happened to her husband. And so we carried on, and it was very special for me because he kind of led me by the leash just ambiguously enough that I didn't know I was doing her quest line when I was doing the whole Corpse Groom quest to go to Tamtara Decroft hard. So I went into it completely blind. I knew that we were encountering someone named Edda, but it wasn't until I got to the very bottom and saw the cutscene for her that I pieced it all together what had happened. I was reading all the letters in the dungeon. I was looking at all the names of the bosses. I was seeing the fact that her other party members were in there. But everything really snapped together so uniquely once I actually got to her final boss sequence. Which, granted, you're technically fighting a Veer rather than Edda, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. And so
phenomenal for me.
And so is that when you were really like, oh man, I love this character? Or when did that happen?
That was at least part of it. I would like to say that was the start of the whole idea of really liking this character, especially because a lot of her story comes from the idea of taking the archetype of a healer that is consistently beaten on and then pushing it genuinely to its limits, to the point where when her tank dies, when her husband dies because he ran too far into a pack of too many moths, which is a very relatable experience as someone who's played a healer all of their life and afterlife. It is a very relatable experience, and it was pushed to a narrative extreme to the point where it turned macabre. I mean, it was to the point where she turned to necromancy, which is still tangentially a form of healing, a form of keeping people alive. Because the intention was pure, but there was a corruption to it. It was perverted in a manner, not perverted as in it is taken far beyond what it was originally intended for. It's being poorly misused in terms of its original purpose.
Right.
And after we got done with the Tamtara Decroft, and I saw that jump scare for the first time. Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of horror, but considering all that I've seen before, that was really like this is something special. This is a side quest I would have probably never done if it wasn't for him, and this is something that I really wanted to see more of. Well, luckily, my friend Captain Jack is a very good friend, because he quietly and slowly took me over to the Palace of the Dead. But he waited a little bit. He waited about a week or two because he wanted this whole story to set in and make it to where I forgot it just enough. It sat in the back of my head just enough that when we did the Palace of the Dead, I got to piece together again just who it was that was following us in all the cutscenes from floor 1 to 50.
And the mysterious floating person in the middle of the battlefield you just cleared
was Edda. It was very special. I've never always been the greatest fan of horror. I used to be very adverse to horror movies or scary things. Not because I genuinely disliked them. I just used to be a bit more of a scaredy cat than I was before. But
understandable. I used to hate horror stuff, and now that I'm a bit older, I've gotten more into it.
It was very interesting because I've always been a bit horror adverse, but I was very a big fan of tragic stories, often about death and love. And naturally, Edda was checking all the boxes. So when I see she finally comes back one last time in this sort of almost funeral dress version of herself, a widower's dress to say the least. I mean, it's a mixture between like Lolita-esque attire, if you know the Lolita fashion style, and also a widow's outfit, and that really set everything into place for me. It was the sort of thing where I wasn't thinking about it at the time, how much I liked this character, But then I realized I couldn't stop thinking about her. It was very enchanting is the way to put it. You could consider it almost like a possession.
I want to take a minute before we wrap up part 1 and get into part 2 of the interview. I feel like you were talking about how you needed a bit of time to steadily remember everything that happened, and I feel like we're talking about Edda a lot, and we should probably review her story a little bit. Now, I know that a lot of people might consider the usual stage play thing of, a tragedy in 3 parts, but I would argue her story actually has 4 parts, and I'll get into that a little later. But let's start with everything that happened pre-Deepcroft, which is you meet this really cheerful group of adventurers, and you encounter a woman named Edda, and she has a crush, obsession, whatever you want to call it, with a certain other member of her party. And then you have the events of Deepcroft, which would you like to describe for us?
I would love to, but before that, I would like to clear the air a bit. It would happen to be that by the time of Sastasha, where you first meet Edda and her party sitting outside, she was actually being berated by her team because she had ran up the hill exhausted. She was told to go into town to buy potions. But at the time, the party was not very well off wealth-wise, so she didn't have much coin to buy enough potions. So she was exhausted sitting there without coin. And her other half, Avir, which by then the two had already been engaged, was berating her because he was always he's never really good with showing his affection. It was relayed in the lore book that he was a little bit more affectionate, but was just bad at showing it. Leovine was chastising him, Leovine being the archer lady who was known to somewhat have a crush on Avir. And Palerea was kind of off in his own little corner, just thinking about how poorly the situation was going to go. So you just see him at the front of Sastasha, and you go about your dungeons, and you continue your duties of becoming the Warrior of Light. And then at about, I think, level 30, I don't remember the specific quest that triggers it, but there's a cutscene within the quicksand where Edda finally returns, and she just thanks you for inspiring her, because by then you'd only met once, but she had heard the tales of your successes and of all that you've accomplished in the same time that she's been an adventurer, and it inspired her post the death of her husband, who was unfortunately beheaded, to start the path again of being an adventurer. She was going to go back to her home village and bury the head of her husband and start anew in whatever way she could. It was a little vague on what she thinks she was going to go off and do, but it was a start. Adventurers are never really always fully set on what they're going to do. You go to this place, and then sometimes this place has jobs or it has an adventurers guild, and you figure it out from there. So that's kind of like all the pre-Deepcroft. The next time you encounter her is naturally within the Deepcroft, as Palerea receives a invitation to a wedding. Now, this wouldn't make much sense because by then, Avir had already been decapitated. Her party had blamed the death of him on her. Sorry, I should have said that. Shortly after Tamtara Deepcroft, there's a cutscene where they're all in the corner. Everyone is, both Leovine and Palerea are crowded around Edda, blaming her for the death of Avir. So not only has she lost the person she's loved the most, the person she was planning to genuinely marry come next summer, but her whole team blamed it on her, despite the fact that he was the one who ran ahead recklessly and got beheaded as a result. So, going back to Deepcroft, these timelines are getting a little messed. You receive Palerea receives a wedding invitation for a man that he knows is dead, and he figures that something is deeply awry because not only had they blamed Edda and it made her feel incredibly horrible, but something just seemed off about the invitation. It didn't look like it was written by a person of sound mind anymore. So you go down to the Deep Croft and you figure out all the horrors down there, in which he's eventually you receive the invitation. You go to the grave to where Avir was supposedly buried, and a few other bodies. You inspect the grave, and you figure out that it has been dug up and tampered with. And that's when they decide, we need to go to the Deep Croft. We need to stop this wedding. Something is bad. So they head down to the Deep Croft, and that's when all the horrors of the Deep Croft are unfolded. You know, you find the pages that are detailing Edda's journey post Avir's death, going back home and then finding a strange book, and then being unable to live with the thought that she will never see him again. She'd already been pushed to her emotional limit. She was in an incredibly dark place, and she couldn't take it anymore. And there was a book that she should have never gotten her hands on, that said that if she did this, she could bring him back. And that was what the Deep Croft was all about. It was about gathering enough bodies. It was about finding the perfect body, the perfect soul, in which to cast Avir's form into again. And that's why when you finally get to the last cutscene in the Deep Croft, after you've passed all of the writings on the wall spelling out Avir's name, all of the letters that are detailing how she's going to bring him back, and all the enemies that are discarded bodies and failed experiments of hers, that's when she realizes, you must be the perfect candidate. Your body must be the perfect one, because all she's ever heard is good things about you and how accomplished you are. If Avir's going to come back in anything, he might as well come back in his best form. Unfortunately, that form is yours. But it's so nice of you to drop by the wedding home. It really makes things easy, because she didn't exactly invite you, but here you are. And so that is how that cutscene plays out, and then the boss fight ensues. Unfortunately, you do take down Avir, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. I have a bit of a conflict of interest here. It is to my belief that once you defeat Avir, whatever trance this book seemed to put her into, because it's very clear by this point that not only is she not of sound mind, but what's going on in this Deep Croft is no longer just Edda. There's something clearly leading her on, that has taught her how to do all of this, perform all these rituals, because she may have come across a forbidden tome, but I don't think that's enough to push many people to that absolute extreme that she did, to the point where she's gathering potentially 100 bodies to try and bring back her husband. So when you finally do defeat Avir in his somewhat broken state, it snaps her out of it. She comes to terms with the fact that her husband is dead again. She trails backwards. The candles light up the edges of her robes, and she falls off the platform into the darkness. And as many people have noted, right as she starts to fall off, and she's holding her hands up to the camera, you'll notice that she smiles. The sort of expression of grief and sadness morphs into a strange smirk just before she falls out into the chasm and out of sight. And it was to my knowledge that is either a result of some sort of possession that I believe the book has put upon her, or some deal that she may have made with Nebeth. Nebeth being the man who created the Palace of the Dead. The reason why I link these two things together, if you don't mind me continuing.
No, please go ahead.
I believe that Nebeth has made a contract with her near that moment, or it might have even been the book's possession was his doing, because once you defeat her in the Palace of the Dead, she notes that she doesn't really remember anything, but she remembers a man in dark robes. She says, all I remember was falling and a man in dark robes. Well, here's the thing. You saw the cutscene where she was falling, her last memory before she died. You never saw a man in dark robes. There was only one man she probably could have known. That was a man in dark robes that could have made such a strange deal with her. And that would probably be Nebeth Opdalord. So I have a feeling that a lot of the events of the Tamtara Deepcroft were influenced by Nebeth in advance. So that by the time of her death, she would be able to be resurrected in the palace and brought back as I guess an experiment of his. So
that's a very interesting take on that. I've never thought of that before.
It's a bit more intricate than you could think. Now, actually, this is theory work. None of it is at all confirmed. But there are clear lines to draw where there is vagueness and ambiguity.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm willing to say it makes sense. So, the Tam Tower Deepcroft ends. Obviously, we have Edda falling into this pit. So, do you want to talk about the next time we see her, which is Palace of the Dead?
Well, I should say that we do see her one last time outside of the Deep Croft.
Well, we're good. We're getting to that. We're getting to that. I wanted to actually save that for last.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, going to the Deep Croft, that was the house at Deathville. You were called there by, I believe, one of the Padjollies. If that's how you said that word. I've never really said that word out loud before.
That is how you say it.
Yeah, you're called by the Padjollies to investigate this place. You suit up in your Aetherpool armor and your Aetherpool weaponry, because the palace is noted to be made of weird magics that will sap the life of anything that steps into it. And the way that the Padjolly armor works is it's basically incredibly condensed ether that protects you. So it's clear that whatever is in this palace is incredibly life-sapping and incredibly powerful. So you put on your weapons and you head in, and for the first, well, I suppose for all floors leading up to 50, every subsequent cutscene that you get, you notice that someone is following you. First, it's taking the teleporter at the end of floor 10, and you see a hovering set of shoes that have been watching you. And then as you go through every few sets of floors, it was every 5 or every 10, you'll get a cutscene that shows a little bit more of her, of this thing that was watching you the entire time. It'll go from the boots to like the edge of the skirt, and then eventually you get a whole shot you get a view from the back of her visage. It would be from her hat to about mid-torso. So many people who are drawing the lines already saw a lady with hair similar to Edda, wearing a hat that was similar, but new attire. By then, Edda had already struck in a visage with many people of the community, because it was like the one real sudden horror experience the game had to offer. I mean, there's scary moments in the game, but nothing that was so horror ingrained as the Edda questline. But you'll notice that there's also blood in her hair in that model, or in any of those cutscenes, which is a new addition. And the cutscenes will carry on going through all the way up to floor 50. And at floor 50 is when she finally confronts you and finally talks. She declares that while you are a guest of the palace, you have unfortunately wandered too far, and you must be shown the way out. And that is when the boss fight starts. Now, what I do love about the boss fight is that it brings back many mechanics that were in the former boss fight. So not only does it tie a design language system together, but you'll notice that the whole platform and most of the attacks are a recreation of attacks that you saw in the Deepcroft. Not just to reuse resources and make development easier, but all of it's intentional, and all of her moves have changed to also reflect this, I guess, forbidden love is the way to put it. This love after life she has, like her Tank Buster where she charges you, or no wait, I believe her AoE is called Black Honeymoon. She has a charge down attack. An in and out AoE that are called, I believe it's in love and health, and in sickness and weakness. But it's all playing out like wedding vows. Like this wedding is still going on in her mind. Because when she's in the palace, it's not really Edda so much as it is something that is using Edda, shaped like Edda, but entirely fabricated by Nabeth. Nabeth has used her as a sort of, how do I put this? As almost like a mold for his experiments. Because he believes that what Edda has done, how powerful her soul is, and her desire is strong enough that it might bridge the gap between living and dying to finally create his image that he so desires, which is, one, necromancy, being able to bring back those he's loved back to life, and two, the gateway to complete immortality. Because he believes that if there's a soul strong enough and willing enough and conflicted by so much emotions, it could truly bring something not just back to life in some macabre fashion where it's a zombie, it's an ashkin, it's something that shouldn't be alive and that is actively decaying. He believes that you can fully bring someone back, every last piece of them intact. And he uses Edda as his finest experiment. This is his best project yet. Unfortunately, though, your title is the Warrior of Light, so that didn't play out so well. You end up besting Edda, and as she falls to the ground and explodes into the aether, you'll see the ghost of an Edda you're more familiar with form. Not the Edda that you see from the Deepcroft, but the Edda you see before, where she's in her brown robes, as I like to call them. Some people call it the potato sack, but she'll be in her brown robes from before she went mad. And that's when she says, "Oh, it's good to see you again. I've started anew, just like I promised. But how did I get here? All I remember is falling down, and a man and a set of robes." And then her ghost just erupts. And the last memento you get of her is a shining object on the floor. And as you walk over to pick it up, you see that it's her wedding ring. It was the wedding ring. Or rather, more so the engagement ring. But that's kind of your last memento that you get of her for as long as the palace goes. You get cutscenes and references and explanations from Nabeth Abdelord, sort of entailing that this was my finest creation. They've destroyed her. I guess I'll have to face them myself. And, well, to any of you who have cleared floor 100 to floor 200, you know how well that goes for our good old flying necromancer man. But pertaining strictly to Edda, that's the last you see of her palace-wise. She dies on floor 50, and then you get illusions and explanations going up to floor 100.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that there's something in 14 that sets her apart from every other NPC and every other boss we encounter in the game. Most people think, oh, well, she died in a Deepcroft, we'll never see her again. And then they see her in Palace of the Dead, and she dies in Palace of the Dead, and they're like, all right, we'll never see her again. But there is something after that that makes her very unique, that takes place in Ul'dah, Limsa, and Gridania.
That is very true. Which is great because there are many people who know it and many people who don't. It's just in the territory where it almost sounds like an urban myth within a video game, which is rare nowadays in an age where everyone has high-speed internet and access to talk to each other instantaneously. You don't get, like a playground kind of talk, where it's just like, oh, well, this mystery exists if you do X, Y, and Z, or, oh, the ghost of this will exist if you log in at this specific time and go to this specific area. But for Edda, this is absolutely true. Post defeating her in the Tamtara Deepcroft, you can actually catch her ghost, the visage of her that you might have noted from a certain cutscene post-dungeon that may have been jump scare adjacent. You can find her within Gridania, Ul'dah, and Limsa Lominsa in 3 set spots. They're all a little out of the way. Most people will note the Gridania one because it's under a somewhat prominent lamppost, but the conditions are that post defeating her in Tamtara Deepcroft, and before I believe you clear floor 50 or floor 100 in the palace, some people debate back and forth whether it's one or the other, but it's a bit hard to tell. There is a less than 1% chance every in-game day at 2 a.m. So you'll have to switch your clock to Eorzea time for this. There's a less than 1% chance that in one of those 3 locations, she will appear. It happens every night, and it's always by a light source, just like the jump scare she originally presented for you. and she'll just be there for a few moments. Maybe she's watching you, maybe not. Maybe she's thinking about her time of adventuring. I mean, I know that there are many people who have strong memories that resonate with the Warrior of Light for one reason or the other, and maybe this is just her reflection of that, her memento. The same way that sometimes a certain, how do I put it? A certain Elzen with a very good smile and a very key phrase will oftentimes come back in conversation and in memories that are made manifest, to say the least. I would like to say their name, but in saying so, I might spoil it for some people.
This is all to say, my dear friend, that remember, depending on where you are in 14, you may think Edda's gone, but Edda may never have left you.
There is one last thing that you can do involving Edda. Post Palace of the Dead, it should unlock... I'll have to check the requirements again, but it's either a quest that unlocks after floor 50 or floor 100. But you'll find it right outside the place where you enter the Palace of the Dead. It's called A Nightmare's End. And it is a final quest where you meet with Peoreo, since both Avir and Leovine are dead. And he says that he's having nightmares. Even after you take care of Edda within the palace, he's still having these nightmares where it's a visage of Edda saying that she wants to go home, she wants to rest. And he thinks that he understands the reason why. And it's because at the time, you have one of the wedding rings. You have the one for Edda, but you don't have the one for Avir. Now, Peoreo thinks that he knows where it is. So both of you head down to a creek that's nearby, the quarry mill, which is the place where the Palace of the Dead is entered from. And you find this ring. He thinks that at some point when Avir was drunk or far past the point of sanity in the middle of the night, he may have accidentally lost the ring in that stream. So you both dig it up. And from there you find a suitable spot to bury the rings and say your last respects. In order to go home, she just wants her final wish fulfilled, so you take both these rings, a symbol of their love for each other and their connection. Although some people would care to inform me that Avir was not very loving and not as affectionate as they'd make out, but luckily I'm the one telling the story here. You bury the rings together at a cliffside facing Limsa, and then as you do so, you hear one final disembodied voice just say, "Thank you." And that's it. That's how you complete the Nightmare's End. That's how you put the nightmare to an end. And that's the last you ever see of Edda. At all. Well, unless you see me, or unless you see another Edda.
And on that note, we are going to end part 1 of this interview. Edda, myself, and hopefully you, my dear friend, will be back for part 2 right after this break. Alright, welcome back. I am here with my wonderful friend Edda to talk about one of the most unique NPCs in Final Fantasy XIV, the character Edda. Now, we were talking over the break about just how unique Edda is, and I realize some people may wonder, why am I devoting an entire interview to one NPC? If I had to explain, it's because I realized we had a lot of people join our community during Shadowbringers, Endwalker, and especially here in Dawn Trail, and may have skipped over a lot of stuff from ARR and Heaven's Word, or not realize that in terms of NPCs, Edda is so unique. And I believe my friend is able to shed a bit more light on just how unique of a character she is.
Yeah, it's a character that I hold very near and dear to myself for the way that people have introduced her, but one of the main reasons why I love Edda from a method that she's introduced and utilized standpoint is that she's just in between the lines of a major support character in the game. Like, she has her own quest lines dedicated to her, and she's involved in other aspects of the story, but she's also obscure enough that there are many people who play this game and will never see her or never know about her. I mean, half the people I know who discover her or know that I am her is because they'll play through the Palace of the Dead because they want to do a deep dungeon. And they're like, oh, that's Edda. And then there's some other people who will usually be more veteran, more seasoned players who will point out, you do know that Edda's more than just being in the palace, right? And that sends them down the wild rabbit hole of doing the whole quest line a little out of chronological order. But it's very fun in that sense. And in role-playing as that, there's also a lot of strings that I get to pull, both from being a somewhat obscure character that some people will recognize. So it's kind of like a if you're in the know sort of gig. But there's also she's a horror character. So when I get to roleplay her, I get to do something that many other people don't get the opportunity to do. And that's either depict a character that can scare other characters, or depict a character that can scare the writer if you do it just right.
Now, let's say you're listening to this, and you're thinking, okay, Nobu, I get it. Yeah, she was a cool NPC like 10 years ago. But I want you to keep two things in mind. One, she is a unique enough NPC that her outfit is on Mog Station, as well as scythe weapons, which are pretty cool because pre-Reaper, we didn't have those. So for instance, one of my alt characters is a Dragoon main and running around with Edda's scythe. But also, manga spoilers ahead for those who haven't read Eorzea Academy. She is a important enough and unique enough NPC that in a manga devoted essentially to the Scions and our main character enemies in the story, they still devote an entire chapter just to Edda and making an appearance in that manga. And I feel like that only underscores just how special of an NPC she is to not only the community, but the creators of the game themselves. Wouldn't you agree?
God, I'm so happy that you know about the manga. There's not many people who do, and it'll come as a pleasant surprise for them, but yes, there's a whole manga novel of Academia Eorzea. There's a few alternate titles depending on how people translate it. But there's a bunch of other media that she's in as well and complementary material, but she's still special to a lot of people on or off the writing team. It's kind of a diamond in the rough kind of situation, where there's a whole lot of materials you can go through where the game will use NPCs and it will occasionally bring them back, and they might be special or recognizable in one way or another. But almost none of them are ever in the way that Edda was. Edda was a very dark storyline in a game that is often about looking forward or looking ahead, that will have dark moments, but nothing that swoops so low, so deep into that sort of feeling. Outside of the existential themes that were explored in starting in like Shadowbringers, but more so in Endwalker. And speaking of complementary material to Edda, did you know that Square Enix did an official collaboration with the fashion brand Alice and the Pirates to make Edda's outfit a real dress that you can wear?
I think I had heard about that, actually.
The circumstances were a little unfortunate, I should say, because they made it an actual dress. I believe they produced about 100, or somewhere in the ballpark of 100 to 500. But they were only available to the Chinese audience that plays the game. It was only sold in China. And the way that you could get access to it was through lottery. So you had to sign up, they'd pick your number, and then you'd be able to purchase the dress if you got your number picked. So I don't have my hands on that. I was surprised that they made it Chinese only, but who knows, maybe over there they're big fans.
Wow.
I never hear much from that audience, naturally.
From what I understand, so China and South Korea are on different release schedules than the rest of the world, and right now the dev team is working really hard
to make sure to try and get all 3 release cycles to be at the same time, because they really want the global 14 audience to be able to celebrate and enjoy stuff at the same time, especially because we've seen just between like NA and EU servers on social media, people are posting about stuff on the same time on the same timelines. And so I guess the dev team really wants to try and better sync those, but it's a process that is taking time.
Absolutely. It's an effort to be applauded for. As someone who's done a little bit of messing around with game design, both through education and on their own, I understand just how hard it could be to work on version control and try to make sure that everything is synchronized. And I can only imagine the amount of effort and resources that have to go to either trying to make sure everything's compliant with every territory, or just bringing everything up to date at once. That could be a very big task for some teams.
Oh, I have no doubt. Now, I did want to ask, in regards to Edda's story, people interpret the story in different ways and have different views on it, obviously. You have a lot of people that view it as tragic. You have some people that view it as obsessive. How do you personally view her story? How would you analyze her character arc?
Well, I would view it as both of those. I very much see it as a tragedy about an obsession. I see a lot of it as a tale that is both unfortunate, as it can really peel back the layers of the mind and deconstruct tropes. The way that it goes into Edda's headspace when she has her other half killed, her beloved killed. When she has her team blame her, a team who was already berating her from the start, whether she was unable to get potions or whether his death was her fault, and really pushing her to the brink for a lady that has just started adventuring, just started living out in the world outside of their house. I mean, they escaped their small village up in Abalathia's spine. So this is all a new experience for her, and it's all going so wrong. And now she has nobody. She's all alone. Her team, post Avir's death, they all kind of disbanded and went off their separate ways. So in that way, it's a tragedy, and it's like, I can see the spot where she fell into this depression, and eventually it could turn existential, and whether or not that she found this book and it convinced her to become a little crazed, or the book possessed her and it used her emotions to amplify this crazed expression. It's absolutely a tragedy that turned obsessive. Naturally she became obsessed with bringing her other half back to life. This is someone who was willing to dig up corpses by the multitudes and kill other people to use their body as mediums to bring back her beloved. It's to the point where you can notice in some of her quotes, and in the lore book, it will directly state that she became apathetic to life itself, a trait that is very befitting of most that follow the necromancer trope. But I also like her story trope and story design-wise, because to me, one of the reasons why I fell in love with it is because it's a deconstruction of the healer trope as well. Usually a healer, and is stereotypically, whether it's inside of a story or inside of like your general MMO experience, they're often the backbone of a team. It's if you don't have your healer, you have multiple dead bodies on the floor. But this was a healer who was not appreciated for the roles that she did, not appreciated for the strengths that she offered the team. And once she's pushed to the brink, she'll continue healing at all costs. It's just not in a way you ever wanted anymore. She is still being a healer at the end of the day. It's just in a perverted extreme. It's been taken to the far edge of what it should have been. So in that case, it's many things at once. Naturally, a story with, not 2,000 words worth of dialogue has a bit of interpretation you can set aside for it. But I really find this to be something special because it's very complex for how few words and how little screen time it all gets. There's not a lot of screen time for stuff that goes on with Edda. She gets a cutscene sequence over in 30 seconds. She gets the Palace of the Dead quest line, which is about a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes worth of cutscenes that mostly don't involve her. You get the boss fight. You get the little snooping around cutscenes in the palace. Then you get the little palace epilogue cutscenes and all that. And it's, for only being about 10 to 12 minutes worth of her existing and her being something that you interact with or listen to, there is an incredible level of depth and care put into this character that is unmatched by a lot of other stories, whether inside or outside of Final Fantasy XIV.
You hit on something that I do want to talk about, and I've been curious to ask you about. Edda is obviously not the most fleshed out character. While she certainly seems to appear at several points, I can't say that we actually learn too much about her personality. It seems like most of what we do know about her tends to be tied into her obsession. So have you gotten a chance to flesh her out as a character? Are there any ways you've kind of come to make her character your own, in a sense?
Oh, absolutely. In order to make this a character rather than more almost like a sideshow attraction, which I kind of did when I was starting out, before I fully figured out if I wanted to be this character, if I wanted to fully roleplay as her and invest in it. Because the most material that you usually have is this is a character that if you roleplay as her, she's already dead. There's only so much that you can work with. It's not like this is a character that will get more lore as time goes on or more story. It's a one and done deal, and her book should be closed. So as someone who has to flesh her out, I have to either find logical reasons as to why she still exists, or I have to make it entertaining enough to where people can agree, like, okay, I'm okay with this person playing as a clearly dead NPC, carrying on with role-playing anyways. So for figuring out ways to really flesh her out, I took a lot of inspiration from just her quotes. There was a time where I knew almost every one of her quotes to the word, down to the letter, and I really studied that, and I took into account a lot of the tropes that her story had presented, and I tried to expand on that. I mean, I should say, they did have supplementary material. Standing right next to me is the Eorzea Encyclopedia. But even that doesn't have too much information on her. Outside of, she was 16, she was a healer that came from Abalethea's spine along with Avir. They were both childhood friends that eventually turned lovers. And she has a knack for cleaning. That's about it. Outside of eventually doing the whole Tantera Deepcroft thing. So I had to get very creative. I tried to both imbue ideas that were my own about her. Like whenever I scare people, it's like, I could play a scary character, but if all I'm doing is just appearing to jump scare you and then disappear, there's no weight to that. I have to keep this momentum going. So in order to fully flesh her out, I like to make a lot of my appearances in role plays and in scenes very dramatic, almost stage play, to the point where when I arrive at most scenes or I arrive at most venues, I'll start out by switching over to ninja, because Edda's outfit could be worn as any class. I will use the hide ability to look translucent, whether characters interpret it as this person is attempting to hide from me, or this is a ghost and I can see through her. It kind of starts off the dance. It's the first act of this sort of play.
Oh, I never considered that. That is creative. I like that. Well done.
I'll do that. I'll walk around. Whether it's physically or through the chat box, I might note that some things are strange. Like, for example, she might walk behind someone, tap them on the shoulder, and disappear. Or she might go and pick something up, and then other people who, roleplay-wise, can't perceive her will see this object is now floating. Or the room has suddenly gotten very cold when it should not be. There's a furnace next to me. They'll interpret that, and it starts the build-up. It's almost the same way that you would perceive a horror movie playing out. So there's the build-up. There's the something is wrong, something else is in here with us. And from there, I'll slowly escalate it. I'll start making more weird things happen, or I'll use the laugh emote in a disembodied location. Because when I do that, that is now something that characters can hear. Whether or not they can see her, this is a new sense that they can react to. Sometimes they'll draw up arms, sometimes they'll get scared, sometimes they'll just stay in one spot. And I'll keep building and building, and then I'll start saying quotes. I'll start saying words. I might even interact with them or respond to something they say or comment on it. And eventually it all builds up to a grand reveal. Sometimes if there's a particular person I like or someone I think is character-wise very perceptible or very receptive of Edda, she will appear before them. Whether that's me using some sort of technique to literally teleport basically around or behind them, or just walking up behind them while cloaked and then uncloaking. I view it and I play it out like a horror experience. Because I want to keep up the same themes, the same motifs, the same experience you got with Edda in the Deepcroft, and translate it outside of that.
And so how do people usually react to you appearing places as Edda? Are they like trying to dispel her ghost? Is it sympathy? How do people tend to approach the character either in or out of RP?
What I've really enjoyed is that a lot of people will be all over the spectrum of what you said. Some of them will react sympathetic. They will know the tale of Edda, or they'll just be sad but curious as to why a ghost is wandering around whatever setting we're in at the time. They'll be inquisitive. They'll try to figure it out. Some people will play it like their character is scared to death, scared till the day they die. If Edda appears anywhere, no matter how many times she appears, they're going to be running if there's an exit. But then there's some people who will be hostile to her. It's a seasoned adventure. It's a person who is used to confrontation. They see something that is potentially harassive in nature, and they seek arms against it. But then there's some people who will try to dispel her. They'll try to get rid of her. They think that there is a way they can easily free her ghost. Whether that's fighting her off or trying to work with her to solve this problem, since most ghosts are people who are dead, who need to find a way or something that will allow them to move on. They'll go that route. And so really, I can't say that there is one single way or one common way that people will react to her. I really do get the full range of what you expect out of playing someone who is a dead character, who is a ghost, who is now, in one way or another, manifested in this new place. And I'm really grateful for that. Because there's a lot of other people who play other characters or will play other NPCs who will not get such a broad or diverse set of reactions. It's an incredible amount of material that I can play with as a writer, because it also lets me cater my experiences, both to whether it's certain characters on the scene or certain people reacting this way. Like to the violent people, she may be more mischievous or she may be more dodgy. Naturally, if someone's going to try to use some sort of magic to dispel your existence, you don't want them touching you. But for the people who are really scared, that is something that I can feed off of. I can play into the fear factor more. I can get closer. I could do things that are even more strange. I can build up the tension that they're working with. And in that, I oftentimes base my encounters off of the people in the room. I don't want to say that every experience is fully catered to where I'm at or who I'm interacting with. But there's so much you can explore with, because I view it from the perspective of Edda is a ghost. She is a form without a body that is ether. Ether, which, as you know, can be manipulated by external forces. So I view it as the energy that someone else gives off is in one form or another ether, or a certain something some of you might not know about, dynamis, which would influence the way that she interacts with you. Because she's very ambiguous. She doesn't have a form. She doesn't have something that really grounds her. So oftentimes, the people around her, both in-universe and out-of-universe, shape how she will act and behave. If this makes sense.
No, I mean, I get it. I do want to ask, though, and I'm sure you get this a lot, we've discussed the Deep Croft, we've discussed Palace of the Dead, we've even discussed the post Palace of the Dead quest to wrap everything up. How do you justify to other people playing a twice deceased NPC?
Which is that's a very funny question. You know, when I started this, I expected a lot more pushback. I would assume that people who had known this NPC would see it as she's already been killed off twice. Why are you trying to roleplay her now? Like, I get it, it's fun. It's a cool character. But why are you roleplaying something that should be well and dead? It's the equivalent of beating a dead horse, character development-wise. But the way that I've come around to justifying it is I've actually written my own story that took a little bit of time to form. Originally, I just kind of left it as there are remnants and memories of Edda in places that sometimes manifest again. But over time, I've written out this little story of mine that kind of entails the reason why she has not passed on. Now, this is getting a little bit into the territory of headcanon. So, while I've said a lot of lore-compliant things before, I should say this is my interpretation, which I've come to find most other Edda roleplayers have their own little interpretation of how they play her too. My Edda is actually the mixture of two different Eddas. There's the Edda that you know, the actual lady who died in the Tamtara Deepcroft, who became a ghost, who eventually passed on in full. And then there's the Edda that was created by Nabeth Abdalord within the Palace of the Dead. Now, as you know from the cutscenes in the Palace of the Dead, or some of you might not know, apologies, although I assume by now we're far past the point of Edda spoilers.
And how?
But the way that I perceive it as is that when Edda was destroyed in the palace, I view her as a secondary Edda. The Edda created by Nabeth is almost like a painting of a person. It is a recreation of what he thinks Edda should be. And he used Edda's soul and emotions as like a catalyst, or almost like a base. She's the core of this system. But what's around her, or what you see in the palace, is not exactly her. She is completely unaware of this.
Would you go so far as to call her an Edda Primal?
You know, for a little while, back when I originally wrote this all out, that is kind of what I was playing into. Which is fun, because I was playing into these ideas of emotions manipulate reality before a certain element was revealed in the Endwalker questline that was emotions that can manipulate reality. That certainly did not spell out the reason why primals exist, but I do kind of perceive it that way. You know, the emotions, the feelings of people around her manipulate how she works. But going back to my previous thing, I viewed it as there are two Eddas. And the Edda inside the palace, now that she's been mostly destroyed, mostly freed of the original Edda, in her last moments kind of clung on to her in a weird way. I view it as a character who, at least in my headcanon, was almost destroyed, and seeing a way out of this place, out of no longer being in Nabeth's control, he took it. And that was Edda's soul leaving the palace so that she could finally pass on. But it's paradoxical. Because because the Palace Edda attached herself to the original Edda, now the original Edda can't fully pass on. She wants to exist, but in the process of existing, she's denied the person she was based on their proper death. And so, I should say, there's a whole story I'm writing right now that is called Everlove. It's a little slow to get around to. I planned for it to be a screenshot-based story that I would upload to social media, but it would be explaining this whole headcanon I have about why my version of Edda still exists. I'm hoping to make it a full project with multiple parts and at least a few hundred images.
When you make that, let me know, and I will share it on my social media so that others can see it.
I would be absolutely delighted to.
How long would you say you've been RPing as Edda, out of curiosity?
One moment. I can give you, actually. an exact number. Let's see. Because coincidentally, the day that I started being Edda, so to speak, was the day of one of my friend's birthdays. So we were looking at 5 years, 2 months, 5 days, in about 1.5 hours. So 5 years.
I'm sorry, you didn't give me minutes and seconds. It doesn't count anymore. Goodbye.
Well, we can always try next year.
All right. You hinted earlier that there are other Edda role players, and I've come to be informed you have an Edda collective, or should we call it a coven, perhaps?
That is the consensus we reached. The other idea is that it would be called a murder of Eddas, a little bit like a murder of crows.
Oh, I love it.
But there is a little group that I'm a part of. It's more so just like a set of group DMs that we all talk and exchange ideas with as different Eddas. But I was the one that rounded up. Right now it's 5 Eddas, myself included. And then we have one person who plays a Veer. I plan on bringing in a second one very soon. I just didn't know if they would play a Veer for long. You know, some people who create NPC alts and they play them for 2 or 3 days and that's the show. But I was the one that rounded all these Eddas up because after about 3 years of doing this, I realized that it could be a bit of a lonely experience. I mean, role-playing as an NPC isn't the most loneliest thing. There's plenty of other people who have and do roleplay as NPCs, but Edda is, as I've been describing, a incredibly unique experience. It's really a one-of-a-kind sort of thing, and when I finally started finding other Eddas, whether it was in-game or through social media, I wanted to talk with them. I wanted to share my experiences, but I also wanted to occasionally organize meetups, just for fun, or to give people a good scare, because it's a bit of a scare when there's one Edda that enters a event or a venue or a situation. It's even scarier when there's more than one Edda. So we've had a situation where there was one person that I had been following and interacting with for about half a year to a year, just roleplay, just giving them the old scares that my character usually does. And we organized an event where I told them, hey, we should do a scene over here in the middle of the shroud. And so naturally, the person I've been following went to that location. And what they didn't know is that off in the woods, I had the other 4 Eddas in different directions, and they all converged on them at once. That was a shock that no writer can truly be prepared for. No character can truly be prepared for. But yeah.
Nobutaka would scream and pass out. Oh, no, there would definitely be no preparing for that.
But yeah, that coven of mine, the Edda Collective, as we call it, is a group of currently 5 English-speaking Eddas. Although there are more Eddas that I keep in frequent contact with, usually through social media. Like there's 1 or 2 English Eddas that I've met that I don't really ever talk to for long because they come in every now and then. They play Edda in little spurts. But there's also the Eddas that speak different languages and play different regions. Like I believe right now I follow 2 or 3 Japanese Eddas. There's a super popular one who I believe her handle on Twitter, not X, is specifically Edda_Pureheart. And let's see. There's at least one Korean Edda who is rather frequent in their interactions. But I believe there's 2 or 3. So there's still quite a few more Eddas out there that are online through social media or interacting with their own communities in their own ways, that I keep correspondence with every now and then. Whether I am DMing them something and we're having a small, interlanguage chat with each other. Or when they post an image and I'll post an image in reply that's just a little cutesy, just being like, hey, I thought your image was super cool. Here's one I made in response. I was inspired.
That's really neat. I'm glad. It's always nice when you find other people that share your interests, especially with different parts of a community. I mean, obviously, the 14 community as a whole, we all share this game, but it's always nice when you find people that like the same specific parts of the game that you do.
Absolutely. Especially because there's a lot of people who will consistently roleplay NPCs, but they'll often be the bigger NPCs, like it'll be the Scions, or it'll be people who have assisted the Scions, or sometimes it's even a villain or two. There used to be a somewhat frequent Lalafell Emmett Silk that I would see hanging around Limsa and interacting with people. They were super cute. But I have not seen many people who consistently play NPCs that are on the, how do I put it, the level of being known about and cared for as Edda. Like, there's the Scions and all that, but past that, usually if someone plays a character, it'll be obscure background character from this questline that I just so happen to be rather fascinated with. But Edda's kind of sitting as an outlier, both, I think, in the way that she was designed and introduced, and just in the way that she makes other people feel when they see someone playing Edda. It brings back a lot of very strong memories. And it's hard to describe outside of it's an incredibly special experience.
Now, as we get near the end of the interview, I'd like your thoughts on Edda's ghost still appearing around Eorzea, even outside of Gridania. Why do you think that was? How does that make you feel as someone so attached to the character to know that her spirit was lingering about?
For one, I thought it was an incredibly cool touch. Like we've been discussing, not many other NPCs, questlines, or things get that treatment. I mean, we have the Omega questline, where post-Omega questline, you can actually find a certain little robot and a certain little chocobo roaming about the world here and there. But few other characters have gotten that treatment outside of something like Edda, where you can find her at one of the 3 locations in the city-states. And I think that, lore-wise, it's a combination of 2 things. One, it's the fact that you were the one who aided in her death, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, considering she walked off a certain cliff on her own. I think it's the despair and the sadness she felt from that. But I think it's also partially a mixture of her adoration for you. Because there's only 2 people who she was known to appear to. There's either Peoreo, who, you'd have nightmares about, and in a particular cutscene saw the ghost of Edda, or it was you, the Warrior of Light, the person who she has openly stated she's been inspired by and looked up to. And I think that even in death, there's a part of her that still admires you. There's a part of her that is still very happy to see you. Not in any mischievous way, just in a very pure, positive, happy way. It's a bit macabre, but even along the way, there's still memories of the people who you've encountered along the way as the Warrior of Light.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the other thing I'm curious about is obviously URP as a post-Deepcroft Edda. Do you ever RP as Edda Pureheart, or have you ever considered maybe changing your account to Edda Pureheart for, say, April Fools?
Let's see. I should say that for April Fools, I tend to get a little more wild than just switching to Pureheart. I do try to integrate all 3 sort of, I guess, acts or stages you encounter Edda into my act. Like I said, sometimes depending on the situation. So if I'm interacting with a new set of characters and they reference the legend of Edda from the Deepcroft, I might play more into the Pureheart part of her. Or if I think it's a group that's just completely innocent to her, she might just come across as a normal person, even if they don't directly figure out this is a ghost I'm talking to. So I'll play into the Edda that comes before. But then there's some people who are looking for the mischievous necromancer lady from the palace, and that's what I'll play into. So while I do play as technically Edda Blackbossom by name by character, I try to incorporate every part of Edda into the experience, because not only do I want to use the full range of her, but there's some people who want to, as a character, interact with certain feelings and certain stages of life that they encountered her in. Like, some people have their own headcanons that I don't always interact with, that like they reacted to the story of Edda in a different way. Some of them were absolutely horrified, and there's some people that like post Palace will take up her scythe as a memento of her.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, if I may elaborate on that April Fool's part, for April Fool's, like I said, I tend to be a little more elaborate over the years. My biggest ones have done that. I Fantasia into a Lalafell for a day. There were a few people who were upset that I Fantasia back. Apparently, Lalafell Edda was a huge hit. There was one that I did where I called it Badmouth Edda, or instead of being called Edda, I called myself Ed Done, as in, like done with putting up with you, because she was a character that had to put up with a lot in her life. So this was sort of just like an Edda that will absolutely just be off her rocker all the time, spouting absolute nonsense, even if there's no one listening. And then the other Edda that I did, which was really fun, was it was the ghost of Edda, but instead of it being Edda that was talking to you, it was the ghost of Avir put in Edda's body, trying to figure out how this all works. Because naturally she spoke up to a few RP scenes, and there's characters who I very frequently interact with, writers who I very frequently talk to, and I didn't tell them any of this was happening. So they had to very quickly figure out, wait, I'm not talking to Edda, am I? Oh, this is the husband! This is the husband she's always talking about. Because she doesn't, the husband does not speak to the characters. I should say, RP-wise, I play it as Avir's voice is something that only Edda can hear. Like, she'll interact with him, and they'll have even banter in between, like, periods of roleplay and no roleplay. But the other characters who roleplay with Edda have never had a situation where they talk to him. So for an April Fool's, I did let them talk to him. They have a lot to say naturally.
I like it. That's neat. It's very creative. All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to do this today. This was a very unique interview, and I really enjoyed it. I hope you've had fun too.
Absolutely. I've had just the greatest joy. I mean, I get to talk about a character that I don't get to often talk about, that I've been playing for about 5 years, and nonetheless to a very entertaining, very enjoyable interviewer. So
thank you.
I'm absolutely ecstatic for this opportunity. And this has been a genuine delight for me. Thank you for the invitation and for summoning me.
Absolutely. Now, you've been nice enough to answer all of my questions, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have 2 questions you'd like to ask me?
Let's see. What's the farthest you've gotten in the palace?
I fully cleared it.
You fully cleared it?
Oh, yeah.
With a group or on your own?
Oh, I couldn't do it on my own. No. No, I'm not one of those raiders. I feel like if I took maybe half a year, I could, maybe. No, I had a full party, and I'm actually really proud to say that our first attempt as a full party, we cleared Palace of the Dead together, the full thing, and I was so proud. I posted a bunch of screenshots on social media. We talked about it in our group chat for like a week straight. It was very much one of the highlights of my time playing 14.
That's incredible. I don't often get people who have done it on their first time, especially as a group of 4, because while being in the Palace with 4 people is very good vitality-wise, so you don't get a full party KO, you really do just need one bad misstep, whether you're 1 or 4 people, for it all to go wrong. So getting it on the first go, congratulations to you and your team. And for all the people out there who have the Palace titles or the Palace items, I see you every time I walk by. I'm always delighted to interact with you. Whether you have one of the Pad Jolly weapons, or you're wearing one of the titles, or you're just having your little stuffed plush Edda out as a minion, I'm watching. I'm so very delighted. But for my other question, what is your favorite piece of horror media? It could be a song, it could be just a picture, a movie. Most people do movies, or a book. But what's your favorite? Or at least one of your favorites. Some people can't pick a favorite.
Okay. So I need a moment to do a quick Google search,
Not a bother.
but I am actually going to get super obscure about this.
Oh, I love it. Go ahead.
So, for those that don't know, there is another podcaster named Tara A. Devlin who you can find on social media. I tend to promote her stuff around this time every year. She has a podcast called Kowabana, and Kowabana is a podcast where she takes Japanese horror stories and translates them to English
I'm so loving this already.
and then tells the stories to all of us. And there is an hour-long episode of Kowabana. Most Kowabana episodes tend to be 45 minutes to an hour and feature various shorter stories, but there's one episode that's an hour long that I absolutely love, and it's about a creepy family in a haunted camper van. And I will gladly link it in the show notes for you all. But I recommend taking an hour, having a dark room, and just listening to this episode of Kowabana, because it is unsettling, and I was a really big fan of Kowabana up until I got to this episode, and then I heard this episode and I was like, all right, this is now probably my favorite podcast. So I will link that in the show notes, and I hope you all take an hour out of your day to check it out, especially if you're listening to this podcast around Halloween, because how more appropriate can you get than a horror podcast?
See, here you were interviewing me, and I'm the one that gets to find one of the best pieces of my day.
Well, the thing is, I want to get more into the story, but if I do that, then you'll already know what to expect going into it. So far, all you know is creepy story, creepy camper van, and that's all I'm going to give you. And everything else from here forward is going to be something that you get to experience for the first time the way I did, and that's really the experience that I want you to have with this.
How splendid. What an answer. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Well, I think we're good for this interview. So again, thank you so much for taking time to be here, and thank you for allowing me to get to know you better. This has been a wonderful day. I hope you'll have a good afternoon.
You as well, and to anyone listening at home, if you are listening around the time of the holidays, I hope you have an excellent Halloween or All Saints Wake. Make sure to get your items. Or Dia de los Muertos. And you are always welcomed eternally in the palace.